Hi everybody, welcome along to another episode of the Dispatches podcast. My name is Brendan Malone. It is great to be back with you again. And today we're going to be talking about greysexuals. What is a greysexual? I can hear you ask. Don't panic. This is a new phrase that has entered the lexicon, a brand new term, a new identity has entered the room. And I thought we would unpack and explore this. And I don't just want us to look at this and go, oh, that's very strange or odd. I want us to perhaps go a little deeper and understand why I think this is happening and perhaps the real philosophical and ideological currents that have led to the situation where we now have a group of younger people who are claiming that they are actually greysexuals, a new sexual identity. So let's read together this article from the New York Post, and it'll explain exactly what this is all about. And I think being the astute listeners and viewers that you are, you'll pretty quickly cotton on to what's actually going on here. And then I want to take a deeper dive into why I think, or what the cultural currents are that are sort of underpinning all of this and have given rise to this brand new focus, this new sexual identity that some are calling greysexuality. Gen Z's latest obsession coming out as greysexual, what it means and how they're discovering they're grey. They're not gay, they're grey. A surprising number of people are choosing to identify as greysexual, with many now sharing the moment they realised they were grey. Isn't that a very modern thing to do? Oh, look, I've discovered a new identity and I'll get online and I'll tell everyone all about it. Greysexuality exists in what many describe as a grey area. So I guess the pun was intended there. Between being allosexual, experiencing regular sexual attraction, and asexual, experiencing none. Those who identify as greysexual may feel sexual attraction really, inconsistently, or only under specific circumstances. So straight away you can see that that description right there is the normal human sexual modality. Normal people feel sexual attraction either really, either inconsistently, or under specific circumstances. This is just describing the normal sexual experience for the majority of human beings when you actually think about this in reality. But in the age that we're in, we've got to give it a name. And there is a reason why I think this happens. We'll get to that in just a second. Reddit users are posting in the greysexuality subreddit, a growing online community of over 8,300 members, about their experiences dating and being intimate. In one post, a user explained that they had spent much of their life assuming they were just a late bloomer. Crushes came decades apart, rarely lasted long, and they often didn't feel sexual attraction, even to their own boyfriend. So, again, there's several reasons why someone could have this kind of experience that possibly are related to trauma or things in their childhood. But let's assume this is just sort of not that kind of a circumstance, and it's not something to do with perhaps hormones that are flying around all over the place and maybe need a little bit of regulation, any of those kind of other medical things that you could draw on. This is not really particularly unusual. This is someone who is discovering that, in actual fact, in the normal human experience of things, you're not necessarily sexually attracted to every single person you meet, and it's actually quite okay and quite normal to have that experience. And you might actually only meet a very few people over your lifetime that you are really compelled to find a romantic drawing to. That's not actually particularly unusual. But because we've sort of so confused what normalcy is in the area of human sexuality, we've kind of forgotten what it means to have an authentic sexual anthropology, what it is to be human, and to have a normal modality of human sexuality. As Dan Beeson, a greysexual man from London, told Cosmopolitan UK, greysexual is not just, I don't fancy it tonight. For me, it's being completely devoid of sexual desire in bouts, which can last months, and then one day waking up and realizing that instinct had returned. Again, this sounds a lot like the normal trajectory of human life, particularly as you get older, and the way in which the hormones in the body work and, change their working. This is quite normal. This is not unusual stuff here. I'd been aware my sex drive wasn't as regular as others, but I just put it down to my own relationship with sex. That may still be true, but finding out others were having similar feelings and there was at least a community of some number of us was reassuring, he added. Others online chimed in with similar stories. One user said they only ever felt true sexual attraction once in their life, explaining, when I see someone attractive, I don't have that I'd hit that internal feeling. I just want to be near them. Again, this is not unusual. This is a person who actually has a more normal form of human attraction. The disorder is to actually tend toward lust. And if you've exposed yourself to too much pornography, then quite conceivably, that's going to be a baseline sort of instinctual reaction, but it's not a healthy one. The more normal one is actually to say, well, I actually find this person compelling and I want to be around them. That's how things used to work before we talked about hitting that and referring to other people as, hookups and things like that. Another recalled being pressured to experiment with sex in college, confused about why their peers seem to experience desire so intensely and frequently. Ended up getting married, not a good life choice, and things didn't go well in the sexual department. I was constantly ridiculed and pressured into doing things that I didn't want to do. That mismatch in sexual expectations eventually led the person to discover grey sexuality through online communities. One person wrote that their attraction would turn on only every few months, making them flip-flop between identifying as allosexual and asexual until they found grey sexuality and a sense of peace. Again, this is not a thing that person is describing there. They are describing quite a typical human experience. This is not particularly unusual, what they're talking about here. Interest in grey sexuality is growing rapidly, especially with Gen Z. I wonder why. This has got all the hallmarks when you describe it in this way of being a social media-driven social contagion. That's why there's a spike in interest, because it's being thrown at them on a platform that is very effective at promoting and spreading social contagion. On platforms like TikTok and YouTube, videos exploring the term are gaining thousands of views. Creators like podcaster Mark have helped bring nuance to the identity, describing it as a bit of sexual attraction, but to a low degree. Again, I'm still struggling to see what is unique or unusual about this. This is just the normal human experience at play. Many assume that grey sexual people don't want romantic relationships or are simply repressed, but as physiotherapist, sorry, not a physiotherapist, is it? Psychotherapist. Imagine your physiotherapist talking to you about sexual identity. Psychotherapist Jane, last name unpronounceable, explains, sorry to Jane, last name I am not going to butcher in public on my platform right now. It can be hard in both queer and wider culture to confidently own a sexuality that acknowledges desires differently. She encourages those exploring the label to reflect on what contexts spark or suppress desire and to trust their own changing boundaries. No one should tell you who you should be or who you are, she says. And it's kind of strange because this is exactly what this is all about. This is someone saying you are a greysexual. That's a label, that's an identity, that's an idea of who you are supposed to be. That's exactly what an identity is. It's you saying, this is who I am because someone else has told me, here's an identity, and that's who you are. The term greysexual first appeared on the Asexual Visibility and Education Network in 2006 and has since become an important identity for those who never quite fit into the binary of sexual or asexual. Again, this is so troubling. I'll get to why in a second, why this is going on. Some people who identify as greysexual may also relate to terms like demisexual, sexual attraction only after a strong emotional bond. Again, that's normal. That in actual fact is a very typical way to describe the normal female modality of sexual attraction. They are not like men. Men tend to be visual and driven by what they see, and they can be very easily compelled towards a kind of almost rampant sexual attraction, particularly when they are younger and hormones are flying around all over the place. Females typically, obviously not every female, but females typically actually have to form an emotional bond, and the emotional bond is what drives the sexual desire and the desire for sexual intimacy. This is not unusual. This is a culture that's basically lost sight of normalcy, and so it's kind of unsure when it discovers normalcy. Again, it's like, oh, this must be a new sexual identity. In actual fact, it is normal human sexual anthropology. As one Reddit user summed it up, I was so repressed in this regard out of pure confusion. It was such a relief to finally have a word for how I feel. The rise of identities like grey sexuality comes amid what researchers are calling a sex recession. That's a new one. With younger generations reporting fewer sexual partners and less interest in sex overall. Now, you've got to wonder whether the cost of sexual living is perhaps getting too high for some young people. They're looking at it and they're saying, you know what, this hookup culture, it actually comes at far too high a price, and I'm not willing to pay that price. And if that is the case, it's a good thing. If it's because they've become so confused about normal human sexual attraction that they're just checking out, that is not a healthy thing. Or even worse, you can't help but suspect the pornification of culture and the overwhelming preponderance of online pornography is possibly damaging normal human sexual desire for some people as well in this cohort. But rather than a simple lack of desire, experts like writer Carter Sherman, never heard of Carter Sherman, but maybe they are an expert, argue it's more nuanced, involving social media pressure, body image issues, and political anxieties. And I think that's a factor that almost certainly is going on when you talk about this group who are in the sex recession. There's all sorts of factors at play in this, and it's in many ways, it's kind of a troubling trend. On the one hand, you'd look at it and you would say, okay, it's a good thing that you've got young people who are perhaps checking out of a hookup culture, a sexual promiscuity culture. But of course, the flip side is that possibly what's also happening here, and it does seem to be a thing based on what I'm hearing and seeing in a decent body of anecdotal evidence, is that men and women, young men and women, are not actually finding each other in romantic relationships as they once did. And I mean finding each other for the purpose of being in romantic relationships. There's a breakdown there between men and women that is not a good or healthy thing at all. So I guess the $1 million important question is, well, Brendan, why is this happening? What's actually going on here when people talk about grey sexuality? It could be very tempting to take a flippant approach, to laugh this off and point at it and go, ha ha, be very reactive and say that's just another silly, stupid thing, etc., etc. I think we need to actually stop doing that, and we need to start going a little bit deeper here. Let's be more proactive rather than simply reactive to these kind of things. When you see a cultural trend, a social trend, I think it is vitally important to try and understand why that trend exists, because that trend is a fruit, and that fruit is growing on a particular tree, and it is in our best interests, it behooves us to actually discover what that tree is and whether it is a good tree or a bad tree. Is it a tree we want in the garden, or is it one that we actually need to do something about? So I think it is important not just to laugh off these kinds of extremes, but to actually try, this one, by the way, is not particularly extreme, but you know what I mean, to actually, in our modern identitarian culture, to actually dig a little deeper and try and understand what's actually driving this. The first thing is, to me, this screams of a culture, obviously, that is confused because of sexual identitarianism. We have created so many different political categories around human sexuality now that people are basically losing track of what actual normal sexual modality is supposed to look like in human beings. And they think that a normal expression of human sexuality is actually now something extreme or strange or new or unusual, when it's absolutely not. But this is a byproduct of a culture that has lost sight of an authentic anthropology, and it no longer recognizes what is normal and instead has fallen into all of these identitarian political categories that it puts in front of human identity. So you're not just a person, you're now a particular type of person. You're a black person, a white person. And there's a whole ton of these identities that are primarily actually in the public square built around sexuality and sexual desire. You're a gay person, you're a queer person, you're a cisgendered person, all those kind of things that are thrown around. And what happens is, in an identitarian-based culture, we get so fixated on a very narrow, artificially often created identity that we then just want to keep making up very narrow artificial identities, and we're not seeing the wood for the trees. We're so fixated on this one narrow thing that we're not seeing in actual fact that there is a much wider diversity in the human community, and what normal human sexual modality and normal human sexual expression actually looks like over the lifetime and over a wider population is not quite as defined as these little narrow political categories lead us to believe. And so there's part of that, and there's also the temptation to want to create categories for every single thing. Every single individual experience has to be named as a separate new type of thing. It's not enough just to be human and to have sexual desire every now and then or under certain contexts. No, you've got to create a whole identity subcategory for that, because that's the normative way. We are not recognizing ourselves first and foremost as persons, the imago Dei, the image of God, and having a unique and very important human dignity and moral equality. Instead, we are categorizing ourselves first as the political category person. So I'm an X type of person, not a person first. And so obviously, this is the natural fruit of that kind of thing. But there are other factors at play here too. It seems to me almost certainly that we are living now, or this particular thing is the fruit of the fact that we are living in a hypersexualized culture, a very pornified sexual culture. And so as a result, we don't really understand that this hypersexualized, lust-driven culture, this hedonistic culture, is not only not good for us, but it's also not normal. It's not how human persons are supposed to be. And as a result, we've lost sight of this. And we now think that if you're not constantly, as this article so crassly puts it, wanting to hit everyone you see, or you might even, I think more accurately say, everything you see, because in a sense, you've objectified the persons that you want to hit. You've treated them as an object of your lust rather than receiving them as a person, as a gift, as a call to love, to give of yourself. You are treating them as an object to use for your own gratification. So basically this obsession, this lust-driven culture, this hedonistic hypersexualization, where we're talking about hitting everything and hooking up with people, has caused us now to think that the normal thing is for you to constantly be lustful and hedonistic and driven by your sexual urges. And if those things are not happening that way for you, then maybe you're the unusual one, or there's something strange about you. That is absolutely a factor in this. And another big factor, I think, that probably almost certainly a lot of people, if not most people, would not even consider is the issue of technocracy. The modern desire to control and to have a dominion over the natural world, using our technology, our scientific prowess, and to take control and to dominate nature. And this is almost certainly, I think, a reflection of that kind of thing. This tendency towards sort of thinking that everything has to be given a materialistic scientific category. We can't just live with the normal human experience. We've got to categorize it. We've got to sort of dominate human sexuality and put it into these little boxes. It seems to me, there's sort of no doubt in my mind that there is a sense in which there is the sort of the technocratic, managerial type exertion over human sexuality and human desire here. It's not enough to simply have a human experience that is like on a continuum, a spectrum over a lifetime or over a community, and there's fluctuations and varying differences here. Instead, no, we've got to seek to pin that down, to name it, to give it dominion, to basically this is kind of another version of what a census is in a sense. A census is actually about exerting control and power. The reason why kings and rulers take censuses is because it's to ascertain what is theirs, what is under their dominion. And census is really about exertion of authority over others or over other things, and putting them under your dominion. And that's exactly what's going on here. There's a sort of a census taking, if you like, a dominion that's being exerted over human sexuality and human anthropology and human identity. Again, why? To make it fit into these subcategories, these identitarian political boxes. And it can be very easy to think, oh, this is just Marxism, this is just a political philosophy. Yes, but it's not quite that simple. Everything is about anthropology for the human person. It just is. We are human persons. Human anthropology is connected to everything. It's never just a Marxist thing. It's actually about us and a question of, do we understand reality? And in particular, do we understand what it is to be authentically human? What is our anthropology? Do we have an authentic understanding of what humanity is, what it means to be a human person? And that filters through everything. And if we don't have that, then we end up with these political subcategories taking dominance instead. We try and create, ironically, this is the great irony, because what you often hear is people who are in this mode of thinking talking about, heteronormativity. This is just a social construct you've created. Ironically, this is perfect gaslighting and projection, because they are the ones running around creating all of these different social constructs to apply to human sexuality. We're not the ones doing that. We're just looking at reality as it is and sort of moving our way through life in that reality, as opposed to a group of people who have politicized everything, who've turned everything into a category and are creating all sorts of social constructs. And all of this has come together. This is exactly what you would sort of expect to see in a culture like ours, which has lost sight of authentic goodness, truth, and beauty in the area of human anthropology and what it means to be human. And sadly, the real big problem with that is if you've lost sight of an authentic anthropology, then you're not going to know something very important that you need to know, and that is, how do you actually achieve human flourishing? If you don't know what it means to be human, you have no hope of actually journeying through life, striving and acting in ways that will actually bring about a greater degree of human flourishing for you in your life. You will end up in a state of brokenness and messiness and all sorts of pitfalls and dead ends because you won't understand who you are and therefore how you should live out your life according to who and what you are. And so, as I said, this is a reflection of a culture that is sort of expressing itself in this way. I also can't help but sense that there are possibly people who are identifying themselves here as greysexual when possibly, or even people calling themselves asexual, when possibly there is a sense in which God might have a calling on their life for a single vocation, a vocation of celibacy, and maybe he has prepared the ground for that. And in former times, they might have recognized that. But again, in a hyper-pornified, hyper-sexualized culture, that gets lost. And it's, instead of seeing that for what it is, it's recognized as, treated. It's not recognized because they're not recognizing the truth, are they? Recognizing implies that they are discovering something, and discovering something implies that it's objective and outside of themselves. Instead, they are creating something artificial here and imposing it upon reality. And what they are doing here is they are instead treating this as somehow abnormal and even abhorrent, dare I say, to some people in some people's minds. Even the fact that they've used the word repression in this article and raised that as a spectre, we've lost sight of authentic human anthropology and what our sexuality is really all about. It is a call to self-giving love, a call to community. It is not about me going in on myself and, turning. There's many ways we can destroy ourselves and do great harm and bring sexual brokenness into our lives by taking our sexuality and turning it back in on itself in an endless cycle of self-gratification and self-seeking and trying to find validation from within ourselves, and exactly in this kind of way, instead of recognizing that our sexuality is actually ultimately a call to self-giving love. How do I love this other person, my neighbor, more authentically? Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, live by goodness, truth, and beauty, not by lies. And I'll see you next time on The Dispatches.